Welcome to another episode of War Hero to Superhero, helping military veterans and first responders transform their lives from the prayer room to the boardroom. I'm your host, Daniel Faust. I have not done a single episode in a while. I've been interviewing people, but in this season, sometimes I'm going to be coming back on here to pass on some content and wisdom that I have gone through or I have learned throughout the years. One of the most trials that I dealt with is what's behind my screen right here. If you've ever seen one of these are eviction notices. Obviously, these are fake. I actually used to do a job that I used to send out eviction notices from 5 different counties, and that time is not a great time. So, how do we go over and thrive despite this struggle? So today's topic, we're diving into the hard topic of homelessness. On average, 200,000 veterans will leave the service each and every year. Especially in these hard and trying times with inflation and everything else, it can be even more difficult to go over and leave, but veterans still go over and decide. You can go over and look at the statistics, the recruiting goals. We're probably going to have more than 200K because the Army is short 25% of their recruiting goals, and the Air Force is about 10% in 2024. The only branch that's going over meeting their recruiting goals is actually the Marines. So you're probably going to see this number go over and swell that people are leaving the service each and every year. On average, in 3 to 6 years, this is coming from Chris Hoffman and his own personal studies that he's done with colleges and universities, that some of us will usually face a struggle, an existential crisis, job loss, or even worse, homelessness within the first 3 to 6 years. I want to share my story to go over and to hope that you go over and learn something from it. And then we're going to dive and unpack that story and break that down into 12 tips, strategies, ways to go over and avoid homeless. But let's go over and get into the story. So I was active duty from 2000 to 2012. I went over and got up to the rank of E5 Staff Sergeant and traveled many different locations, including beautiful Germany for 2 years, Korea for 1, met my wife at Joint Base Lewis McChord, and was there from 2006 to 2010. And then I cross-trained to mental health. I saw myself having a rich career after cross-training at roughly my 10-year mark to go and finish the next 10 years in mental health, helping military active duty and their dependents through their mental health, with eventual goals to go over and help into churches and whatnot. Boy, did my goal go over and change drastically between 2010 to 2012. In 2010, I got there in March and got into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Got to live in a beautiful 2-story home that was provided by housing, getting a regular paycheck on the 1st and 15th. That is most active duty. Some people will go and say their houses are not so beautiful, but in my opinion, my house was. I had 4 beautiful kids, and they were ranging at the time from newborns until about 3 years old. Tried to have 2 cats, and those 2 cats did not go over and do well, so we adopted those cats and just kept on focus with the 4 kids. In that particular time, I was struggling on how to go over and to deliver mental health with people as I was dealing with the struggles of the job and my mental health at the same time in that particular regard. Fast forward from there, I go over and we're practicing for the PT test, and this is how the whole story is going to tie, because this was the start of the abrupt end. So I'm practicing for the PT test and everything else, because now we're doing PT tests and we're actually doing sit-ups and push-ups and runs, and now we're doing way more advanced stuff in active guard and reserve. But at the time, we have not done a regular PT test in years. So everybody's going over and practicing and practicing and practicing, and I'm out there practicing and everything else and doing my push-ups, and my body lets go, and you hear a pop that resonates for about a few hundred yards. Drop on the ground and everything else. Lots of pain. It was this elbow right here. And that was the start of the journey of, in a sense, of my active duty eviction notice in a sense. So I go over and go get checked out and then get my arm in a sling and then eventually get surgery and then eventually get this scar and start rehabilitating myself. So this was in early summer when the injury happened. By early winter, I was getting surgery. And by December 9th of 2010, I was going over and getting told when I got back from convalescent leave and surgery that, hey, Faust, you're going to go over and deploy. And I'm like, what? I'm in a sling. I literally just got off convalescent leave back to somewhat functional and everything else. And they're saying, you're deploying in July, you'll be fine. So I'm doing my rehabilitation and everything else, getting ready to deploy. It's my first deployment in working in mental health. So they're trying to prep me for all these things. They're trying to prep me for counseling and all these other types of things and paperwork and send me to this class and everything else class. And the supervision from E5 to E7 is like, he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand it in a long time. We don't want to go over and deploy him. Everybody that was E8 and above is like, nope, he'll get it when he gets down there. It's just one of those first things. We send mental health technicians all the time. We've sent people out a few months out of tech school and send them out. He's like, he'll have a year plus of training. He'll have his 5 level. Okay. So I go, and the arm eventually recovers enough. The same thing like my finger I broke years ago. It got to a point that it was enough that it was manageable and everything else. And I could get back to going over and doing my normal job and doing regular running and PT tests and all those other types of things. My leadership, again, from E7 and below, is still trying to fight the battle of not having me go. Push, 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 push. They couldn't do nothing. I get down there and I go in July. And I'm prepped and ready. And it's supposed to be a 6-month. I'm not supposed to be back until basically January of 2012. And that's the normal battle rhythm on mental health is that it was chronic critical. They give you a bonus. You're expected to, if you're home for 6 months and then you deploy for 6 months, that's the normal ops tempo. We kept seeing mental health technicians going over and breaking after a few deployments, but they still follow that battle rhythm. It's 6 months on, 6 months off. I get down there and the first 6 weeks are fantastic. I'm working with a provider and they said, you do all the talking, you do all the speaking. We didn't do podcasts back then. You do all the literature, you do all the stuff that is face-to-face customer service type things. And I'm like, great, that's who I am. I love speaking, I love teaching, I love content creation. I didn't know I was going to be doing this 12 years later, but at the time I'm like, yeah, go over and send me out. I'll do work center visits, I'll do visitations, I'll drive to people and connect and just make sure the best I can to uplift their mental health. That's what I came here for. So I'm doing that for the first 6 weeks and everything goes great. Great. Well, she rotates out. Then we get new people. I'm the one that stayed behind. Don't ask me why they planned it this way. They've changed that since then. More and more deployments are now more Army style. And if you have a team, your team goes in together and then your team goes out. So then you synergistically work together. But Air Force back in the day was more like we just constantly throw people in and out just like a base, and you'll eventually get adjusted to the team and then go over and grow. I get the new team in. They're like, oh, you're going to do all the mental health counseling. You're going to go do SOAP notes. You're going to do intakes. You're going to do counseling. You're going to go on the line when they're coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. You're going to see how they're doing and everything else. And I said, I haven't gotten that part. I haven't gotten that part in a long time. That was one of the biggest struggles in tech school, active duty, at the base, preparation for deployment. But everybody's like, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. They finally put me on the line. They go over and give me, obviously paper, but they go over and give me notes. I'm supposed to be writing notes as I'm going over and doing the intake. And an intake is a 90-minute in-depth interview of going over and seeing where you're at in the psychological perspective of where you're at. Are you really struggling? Are you just needing a little bit of mental health? Am I seeing a diagnosis? Are you going to unalive yourself, unalive others? Are you going to go over and cause harm to others? Things of that nature. And I can either do one of two things. And as you meet me and everything else in real life, it's the same thing. I can either focus on you and connect with you and go over and do that. Or I can go over and be a robot and get the content, and then I'm not engaging with you. That's just who I am. My superpower is to go over and to connect with you and then utilize that connection later on. I've advanced since then. I can write a few notes when I go over and speak to people and put references back, but typically it's either all people or all task. You might go and resonate with this. So they're saying, I don't get it. They're saying you have to go over and do all the task and be all the people. And I'm like, well, I caught the knife on the person. I didn't fill out the note. They kept working with me, and eventually they said, this is the disservice. We want to increase our counseling up to 300%. We want you to be all things to all people. I couldn't go over and do that. Worked with my commander, even though I could have went back to IT and did all the IT troubleshooting. And I was doing that when I didn't have patience. Like the guy I was in IT, it was just rough. We'll just call it that. My IT background is pretty strong. And because of that, I can do the customer service and the IT. So that was my strength in the past, but I wanted to change and focus on mental health. But they wouldn't let me stay. So I eventually fly me home. After that, they're like, we're going to try to have you go back to comm. You did great in comm. You had great referrals in comm. You have letters of recommendation. You have decorations. We're trying to send you back. But this word was the most disgusting acronym and the most beautiful acronym now 12 years later. But at the time, they said in the Air Force Enlisted Classification Directory, the AFECD, you can't leave this career field because you don't have a speech impediment and you're not mentally retarded. Those were the words. They have changed since then, but that is the actual words that was in there. So my IQ is not below an 80. I don't have intellectual deficits. I only stutter if it's 16 hours or more of contiguous work, and I'm just exhausted. And overall, they said, you can't cross-train. So they decided, in their infinite wisdom, to go over, and when my performance report was due, they gave me a 1 on my performance report. That was the journey of getting out of the service. So I went from going over and saying, I'm cross-training at year 10, I'm going to go over and serve another 10 plus years, and then go over and retire out of active duty and then do my next mission, to going over and getting abruptly sent home during deployment, middle of it. I didn't do the 6 months. I came back like late August, early September home in that year in 2011, to now going over and going back and forth. And this was months after I got back. So it was around like December, January, even February timeframe. I think it was actually March. Between February and March, I finally get the notice that like, we can't send you back to communications. We can't go over and have you stay here. Here's your performance report of a 1. If you've been on any branch of service, if you get a low rating in your performance feedback, and I mean really low, like the far left, you're going to go over and not continue on service. So they denied me reenlistment. So I went in February or March, now going over and saying like, you're not eligible to reenlist. So I was already working on a degree program when I was deployed, because I was like, I overall wanted to go over. I was wrestling between enlisting again and going over, but the long term is I wanted to go over and to serve. I started getting that entrepreneurial bug. So I went over and went to school while I was deployed. Couldn't access the school while deployed. If you're deployed now, it's so much easier. It's a beautiful thing. But I couldn't get access. I was doing web design as a degree, couldn't get access to the internet resources to do it. So I got an extension. I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to continue to pursue this. And then eventually I'm just going to take my IT pass skills, do web design, set up people's websites and everything else and whatnot. And I'm like, now that I know that I'm getting out, I'm going to go over and do that. But I also felt called at the same time to go over and to do ministry stuff. So while I'm getting this degree stuff, I'm trying to go over and get hooked up into a ministry with my wife. But my wife went with me, but wasn't fully on board. When we went to the ministry and everything else, they said, hey, you don't have these families. You're just getting out. You need to stabilize. You need to find full-time work and all those other types of things. Nope. Grass is greener on the other side. I continue to go over and pursue. I try to continue to pursue the degree. The Air Force doesn't allow me to. I'm getting out 1 July. They're like, if you can get it done 1 July, you can go over and do that. I said, there's no way. It's a 15-month program. I couldn't do it during deployment. So I have 15 months of work within like 90 days. Couldn't do that. That slapped me into a debt. $900 a paycheck for 5 paychecks before going over and leaving. So I'm still trying to be optimistic and everything else. And they're telling me don't sign up for this ministry and everything else. So I go over and bum rush myself to move out of state, even though the ministry said no, didn't have a job lined up. I'm going to go still help relationships because I was doing that on the side with certain clients. And I went over and rushed it. So we went over and rushed to move and everything else. And I got out of active duty 1 July, but they allowed us to move like 6 weeks prior. So I'm like, all right, I got a severance coming. I got 6 weeks of active duty pay. I should be able to go get up and rolling. So I fast tracked down there and get moved. And as much as I can, I took risk. I spent a lot of time. I went over and invested in social media marketing. I invested into all these things. And this was all new in 2012. Even went from church to church and place to place because I'm like, all right, I want to teach you all better relationships. What better place is going over in marriage and everything else? And I try to go over and do that. Failure, failure, failure across the board. I get down to 6 weeks of revenue and I go over and say, all right, I really need to start applying for work. I did apply for at least unemployment. I was getting that. I wasn't on food stamps yet. I wasn't leveraging any of those resources. But 6 weeks prior, I go over and start looking for work. It didn't work. I averagely looked at about 1,000 jobs a day, and I applied for 2 to 20 jobs a day, getting nothing. We got down to $300. Also, my wife was struggling mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And at that time, she tried to unalive herself twice with all this other chaos. And I was not a rainbow at home, to say the least. That's another story about our marriage sanctification, but this is about the homelessness part. So I go from there. She's in and out of the hospital. I'm going over and making financial decisions I shouldn't be going over making. I even made a move while I was even down in Arkansas to another place to get ourselves in a better place. Our place was just fine, retrospect. And I kept going over and making bad financial decisions, bad emotional decisions, not effectively giving good time and everything else. And we got down to 6 weeks, and now I'm scrambling to go over and look for work. Got down to $300 of revenue. And I'm like, Lord, what are we going to go over and do? I didn't pray much. Pray better now than I did back then. Asked the Hail Mary prayer and everything else. And God providentially came in, and my disability came in. So at least I'm now bringing in $700 a month. But I'm like, what's next? And it was only by God's graces that I got a job right before we almost got evicted and almost went homeless. And that lasted for a while. We went over and things started going up and up. My girls got on disability, so that money's coming in. I'm finally getting disability. I'm back in the reserve. That check is coming in. So things were starting to go on the up and up. This was a 6-month contract. The hope to turn to hire was working the job, and it started to go again. About 3.5 months in, my girl's disability goes away because I'm making too much now at this job of an immense amount of hours of $18 an hour. When I was active duty, I was making $55,000. Do the math. And I have 4 kids, and I'm in Arkansas, and I'm renting a luxury apartment. Again, hindsight, things I shouldn't have done in that particular regard. So that goes away. Going from there, then you go over and you get into the 5th month, and I'm thinking I'm about to get hired. I do a week on and a week off. I'm like, I'm going to continue to grow my business because now I'm making all the money in 1 week and then I'm off the next. It was fantastic. 84-hour weeks. Yes, they were 12-hour long days, but it was easy work. All I had to do is monitor networks. So as long as the networks were up, I had no work. If the networks went down, I would follow my checklist. That's it. And then I still had another person or two to go over and help me out. Beautiful job. And I was potentially going to get hired to the next level and you got a $3 to $5 pay raise. And I'm like, this is really cool. It all went down after about 5 months in. It's about a month before I get hired. The whole company restructures. Now they're two separate companies. I just worked 12-hour days for 7 days and now literally go over and get told, we restructured. We moved your position to the other company. You can't stay with us. I'm like, I just got off shift. I literally got off at 7 o'clock in the morning after 7 days straight. Get called at 9 o'clock in the morning saying, Daniel, did you hear what happened? What do you mean? I hear what happened. Oh, they restructured. I said, yeah, I heard about they're doing the split. I didn't know my job was going to get split from one company to the other. It was in the same exact building at the same exact desk. But if you've ever been in the military, manpower is manpower. Once a position gets moved, you're not part of it. They said you can go reapply for the job. So I go over and scramble. We're starting to get low again. We're almost going homeless number 2 and everything else. We decide to go pick everything up and go move to Washington. We sold everything that we owned and moved to Washington. People said they would go over and support us. People say they love us. And that happens at first. I feel there's something of a difference when you go over and if you're proximity with people, they tend to go over and think everything's okay. But if you're calling people outside the proximity, they tend to be supportive. So they were supportive when we were distant, like, hey, you can ship us stuff, you can go over and move and do all these things. We'll go and support and love on you. We initially get down there. We initially find a place that's like super cheap to move in with a friend of a friend and everything else. And I finally get a job that's a traveling job. It paid a little bit more an hour and everything else. So now I took my IT skills again and now doing a mobile job. So I'm on the road back and forth and everything else. Starting to do well. Able to go over and I had to move out of that small rental place. It was a beautiful place. I think I should have just stayed. Another hindsight. It was $500 a month. It was small, but we wanted a place of our own. They said they wanted to rent it out to family or we'd have to pay. And I'm like, I can't do the double dip. I can't be looking for a rental house and paying for another house until I get into the other place. So we found a place and then we moved. And everything was going well in this first place. I think it was about 10 weeks into the job. My coworker, if you ever read a story about the DC Naval shooting, that was my coworker. I missed him by 1 day because I was a reservist. I went back to my reserve base in Arkansas. They said, hey, you don't need to go to the location where you were just at. We'll fly you back to Washington State, get connected with your wife, work like 3 or 4 weeks. We'll put you back on the road. So at least you'll be doing just a local commute. Sweet. Monday comes, doing the job, working in different buildings and everything else. And then the news comes on and they're talking about a shooting at the DC Naval Shipyard. I know that person. I didn't know which one it was because both of them had the same name. Both of them looked very similar to me because I only knew them for like a couple weeks. Both of them had the same first name. I didn't know their last names. And come to find out, it was the quiet guy that I was working with that did the shooting and eventually shot himself, if I remember the story correctly. The job dissolved and went away. At that point, I only had like maybe a few jobs. I worked a few jobs like in that point. But from that point on forward, we kept going through this again and again. We went over and now we got an eviction notice. And that's why this is behind. We didn't even get evicted because of non-pay. We got evicted because in the state of Washington, you can give a 20-day or a 3-day notice. You can give a 20-day no reason notice, and you can go give a 3-day, you got to give a reason notice. In rentals, you can evict a lot quicker. So in that particular regard, scrambling again to go over and to avoid homelessness. And this just kept eroding. So that job went away. And then I went through a pantheon of jobs for the next several years. By the time I got to overstabilization, I went through either last minute eviction, rental issues, job losses, other mental health struggles, and everything else, almost a divorce in 4 times of almost going homelessness. God had provided in each of those resources, either through veteran nonprofits or churches or different things. But the struggle is real. And we had so many trials in that particular garden. It was just immense in that regard. It was just emotionally, spiritually, and everything else exhausting. Now, looking at 2024, we're serving you. We were able to stabilize work. We're continuing to grow this platform. We are going over and we are blessed. But those trials were tumultuous. That was exhausting. I went through 70 different jobs. We moved about 11 times within 4 states. And this is the first time that we've been stable now going on 5 years. Is all the roller coasters done? No. But we're immensely better and we're continuing to grow. And we want to take those lessons that we've learned and pass them along to you, because we hope that you can avoid the struggles of veteran transition. We hope that you don't go through these things. But there was things tactically I could have changed, and practically and spiritually that needed to be embedded from the time that when I got the notice from getting back from deployment. So we're going to reverse engineer this story real quick, and we're going to figure out what we can learn, so we as a whole, might be you individually, you might resonate with the story, but we as a community, to avoid and to reduce the struggle. We all are going to go through our struggles in veteran transition, which I call it veteran transformation, because you never go back. We're moving forward. The only reason we're visiting back is to learn the lessons so we can live better, because we want to learn and live. So let's go into the 12 things that we have gone over and thought about, prayed about, wrestled with, and how to go over and could have made the struggles a lot easier and everything else and whatnot. And maybe you're going through this right now. Maybe you're not even close to homelessness. Maybe you're just struggling in the job and you're in the service and you're like, I just don't want to be a statistic. Or maybe you're going over and saying, how do I go over and thrive if I'm deciding to get out in the next couple of years, or if I'm going to go retire? Because I'm telling you, even if you're retired right now, outside of a couple of my BFFs that are high enlisted or high officer, the majority of us are going to go over and retire or separate with very little cash. I had a severance of $17,000. Got out July 1st, and that money was gone basically between September and October. Even if I was super fiscally conservative, I still would have been out probably by the end of the year, even trying to go over and get a business. So how is it things to go over and to avoid and reduce the struggle and go over and maximize you to get you your true veteran transformation? Because I don't want you just to go over and get a job. I don't want you just going over and being just over broke. I want you to be transformed in everything else. So here's the 12 things that we're going to go over and talk about. So number one lesson that I should have learned really early, and a lot of us veterans typically don't learn it if you look at the statistics at the military and the veteran world, is start saving early and regular. I had 4 kids. I was living paycheck to paycheck, but the paychecks I was going over and spending was on things of experience and trying to love on my wife and all these other types of things and my kids. And the thing of it is that I don't remember most of it. I remember when I was in Germany and I had an extra basically $1,500 to $2,000 a paycheck in revenue, and I basically blew it. If I could even save, let's say, $200 a month from Germany when I got to Germany in 2003, and I was able to keep that for 10 years, $200 a month is $2,400 a year. It would have been $24,000 to $30,000 when I would have left. And in that particular regard, at that point, that would have extended me at least another 6 or 7 months. And that's just at $200 a month. Dave Ramsey goes over and recommends, and you can either be for or against him. I'm like a 60-40 guy, but I agree with this, is that if you have your emergency nest egg fund, about $1,000 rainy day one, and then you go over and you have about 3 to 6 months, then that is beneficial because jobs are not guaranteed. Out of the 50,000 jobs, big companies wise, that hire, only about 10% of those provide compensation packages, benefits, and all those other types of things. The majority of the jobs you're just doing for trading hours for dollars. And they usually don't have retirements and savings plans and health things and whatnot. So if you're planning to join the corporate world, 90% of them are not going to have a comprehensive package. So you can take that savings, and even if you have to work one of those jobs, you can able to at least take that savings and compensate to at least get back to where you're at. So saving early and regular. We need to go over and do it like an allotment. So if you're active duty, or maybe you're working as a government job, or you're a first responder, because we minister to all these people, military veterans, first responders, and you're making that transformation, either getting out of the government service, getting out of military service, getting out of the first responder service, and you're trying to make that pivot, as soon as, I would say, even starting from get out, start going over and saving early. There's some statistics that if you saved $500 a month for up to, I think, 20 years, you'd have enough for going over for retirement if you started that at 18 years old. So start saving early and regular. If I went over and did that, even if I did that before I got out, like, hey, when I got back in September 2011, I got out July, even if I saved $200 a month for those 10 or 11 months, that would at least gave me another 30 days. Because when I got down to that low, it was God's providence that the jobs came in. But it would have been a lot less of anxiety, stress, chaos in my life in that particular regard. 2 is to eliminate debt. The debt that I got in 2012, that $900 a paycheck for 5 paychecks, I couldn't go over and avoid. Those types of debts, sometimes you just can't. They automatically take out of your paycheck. But the debts that I went over and took on because I thought I could add this benefit or service or different thing or product to my home or to my business, especially when I got out, I spent $500 a month on marketing, and they were marketing 18 to 65, all people. And I'm like, I was doing specific marriage ministry at that time. I wasn't as diversified as overall as veteran transformation, and I was liquidating cash. I hired people to go over, and as a nanny, I hired people to help me to go over and to do phone calls and whatnot. I put myself in unnecessary debt, and then I put myself in other things about, vacations and other things. I even put myself in one of those bunch of things. I can't remember the specifics, but it was like some type of resorts thing. And I'm like, I'm not there. I'm trying to live the high hog. And I'm like, I'm putting myself in debt. Eliminate those debts. And if I would have started eliminating those debts when I was active duty, I'm like, and knock those out. The debt snowball works. That's the one thing that in Dave Ramsey's principles, it does work, is that if you chip away the bare minimum on all the debts, and then you try to put a little bit more and do that, and then take it to the next one. I've already eliminated probably about 20 or 30 debts. I need more of a debt avalanche because I've almost been homeless 4 times, as we talked about. But it does work. It does alleviate. So I still continue to do them. I do a model of a debt snowball, debt avalanche. I pay what I can and pay on my bills. And then if I get an overflow, I slam the sucker on the other one and just eliminate it. And then I go over and do that to the next one. I bring some money back into my paycheck, but overall, I'm eliminating debt. And I'd recommend you going over and doing that too, because you're going to have more buying power when you leave. And that can also increase your savings as you're making this transformation. Because you might get in the year 2024, you'll get a small 401k like pension thing when you leave active duty now with the blended retirement. But there's still a lot of our oldies that are in the service, and you're going to come out and you might be waiting on that money to come in. My severance, it was kind of scary. My severance came about 2 to 4 weeks, and I had to go back regular active duty. It was God's providence, right time. But it's scary because sometimes they might not get something system in the right. even as a full-time reservist, I can go do my orders and get done and expect it in 7 to 10 days. But sometimes it can be 15, 30, 45 days and everything else. So when you eliminate debt, your income, at least in this short season, is going to be your biggest capital in there. So if you can eliminate debt, even better, because even if you get retirement and you're totally leaving, let's say you're getting $2,000, $3,000, VA, whatever it is, their goal is to get done as soon as possible. But when you have 200,000 people leaving active duty and then they're processing all those things and they have millions of people in the VA and you're maybe doing a VA claim, it could be months. I did not know I was going to get disability. I didn't know when it was going to happen. It was just providentially, it happened when we got down to that $300. So if you eliminate your debt, you have more of a cash flow to protect you while doing these other things. Number 3 is to cut down spending. I lived in West Little Rock, fancy place. I lived in Washington, like near Seattle. Also lived in Scottsdale, Arizona. Each of those times, I felt the pressure to go over and spend, and do these great things and go to these places and do all this fancy networking or go to this gala or whatever and everything else. The majority of the time, I don't remember what I ate. I don't remember what I buy. I didn't have what the product was. And I usually sold the big items and everything else. So cutting down your spending is key, especially as making this transformation until you get a point of stability and you know that you got it, then cut down the spending. One of the great things I learned from a guy that I worked at an IT job back in like the Seattle, Bellevue area is he did a double savings. So if he bought anything for himself, let's say it was a PlayStation, a computer, anything that was like a big ticket item, he would go over and save double. So let's say he was buying the Oculus, one of my favorite things, virtual reality. You go over and let's say it's $300. He would save $600, then buy the Oculus. So if any unnecessary things came in, he could cover that thing and not be like, do that. Because I bought so many things. Like I had seasons of going up. I've been offered up to $250,000 and that revenue, and I have gone down to 12 jobs only making $30,000 total. And I would still go over and spend like I was at the 250K. So living beyond your means, cutting down your spending, taking that time to go over and to save for the item is key. Now, some more practical things as you're going over and getting out of service, because the first 3 were universal rules. Those things you can go and carry anything in life, no matter if you're military, veteran, first responder, active duty, guard or reserve. You could be owning a multi-million-dollar business. All those 3 things are always fantastic. Now, this gets into the specifics. Plan your job hunt 1 to 2 years prior before getting out. Unless you know for a fact that you are re-enlisting and it's locked down and everything else, your enlistment is not done until it's in the DEER system. I just recently re-enlisted into the reserve for another 6 years, and I did all my work and I did all the paperwork and handed in. It took them about 2 to 4 weeks after that to get done. And I was on the precipice. And I'm here every day. I'm here every day. My enlistment was going to end in April. I tried to do this stuff way early. They wouldn't let me do it until March. And then I'm doing it in March. And then literally like right before the precipice, my career would have been over. So until you have that lockdown 4 to 6 year enlistment and everything else, and even if you're as a first responder and everything else, and that you're going over and looking, plan your job hunt, plan your business, plan what everything else 1 to 2 years before getting out, because it takes a lot of time to find that right job, to find the right revenue, to find the relocation, going over and getting your business up and rolling and everything else. Sweat equity, either planning for your job or planning for your business or planning to go back to college or planning for your retirement. No matter, you can put whatever plan, the blank in there. If you do that 1 to 2 years prior, you're giving yourself that safety net to go over and figure things out. You don't want to be that person that's going over and, let's say in the reserve, active guard, in the first responder world, you say you're going to put your retirement or you're about to leave. You want to have those ducks in a row. You want to have those ducks in a row because you can always leave another job. you can always go over and, stop a business. You can always go over and reboot stuff. I've had several different types of businesses between 2012 until now and everything else. And I've even been a director of a digital TV company. I was going to be something else in an Arkansas government thing. I mean, your plans for you and your legacy are more important than the job in that particular regard, but you don't know where you're going to be. You can decide where you want to go do that rudder when you plan in advance before to go over into shift. Again, when you go over and look at back my story, going back to Arkansas, those were things that were planned without wisdom. The Lord providentially worked through it. But as I'm working through these life things, there's a lot of things that I would have did differently. And yes, it can be exhausting when you're in a job trying to work the next job. But the matter of it is, if I did that, the pains I went through, the messes I went through, the wounds I went through, the trials I would have went through would have been more easily avoided. Number 5, do your VA claim. You could be in the best shape in the world. You could be in the worst shape in the world. I thought I was in great shape outside of the elbow. The elbow I knew was busted. The pinky I knew was busted. Everything else I thought was fantastic. I am now have about a dozen to about 24 different injuries that either they found out when they did the VA claim, or as I've been a reservist, got worse or something got exacerbated on there. And now I'm at 60% and I'm going up again. And the reason why I'm doing that is not to take money from the VA. Definitely not. Definitely not. Your VA claim does 2 things. One, covers you in the longevity of you as your life transforms. You might be 22 or 32, or even me, 42, or let's say you're totally retiring, you did 40 years, 52 or 62. It's not about the money. It's about you overall getting taken care of. For example, if you're above 70%, they do senior care and long-term care, and you don't have to pay for that. Long-term care for one of my friends right now is costing him $6,000 a month. I remember him telling me, he's like, oh, you should have stayed more stable and all these other things and never took these entrepreneurial risks and whatnot. And I had some people say, eliminate your military career. Just totally wipe off and start straight from scratch. The VA is only one of the few places in the world that, even though it has its ups and downs and has its bads and everything else, it has a lot of good. That money compensates you for your injuries, compensates you for the lack of things you might not be able to do, call out sick and whatever. You have that revenue. Then you can use the VA home loan and all these other types of things. Those are benefits that, bar none, I can't think of anybody has, unless you're a multimillionaire and you're paying for all those benefits. So do your VA claim. If you haven't done your VA claim, 22, 32, 42, I have friends in their 60s and 70s. Your job is not to declare how broken you are. You're not the medical expert. I did not know that I had degenerative disc disease. I didn't know I broke out in sebaceous cyst, which is boils everywhere. I did not know that my flat feet, which is plantar fasciitis, it's the aggravation that goes over and pays for it. I did not know those things. We grind up and go by our bootstraps all the time. So it's highly recommended to do your VA claim. Allow them to determine, because even you're at zero and you don't get a single dollar, if those things get worse, you'll get the compensation, but then they're covered medically. They're covered medically. So I only have maybe about a half a dozen that are actually covered compensation wise. The other ones are not, but I still get care for them. And that is revenue to bring back into your pocket. Because it is, if you don't know already, if you're in the service, I'll tell you from me right now as a government employee, $740 a month for a family. If you want to pay an extra 8 to 10K a year plus the expenses and everything else, that's your choice. But I'd highly recommend you do your VA claim. Let's expedite these next ones. Find a part-time job or side hustle. I tried to go over and do my business right when I get out. I'm like, we're going to be going over and doing marriage ministry, went to the churches and everything else, spent money and everything else and whatnot. I was at least getting some things that were coming in, but I didn't know anybody. It took a dang long time. Yes, you can have more time when you're dedicating full-time effort. But the thing of it is that at least when you have the part-time job or side hustle, you'll have those conversations. You'll have compensation coming in. You might find other opportunities that might line up with potential either full-time jobs or a college education or going over in a business opportunity, or maybe you find some other type of thing that helps you to in that transformation because you don't have the network. When I was at Right Pat, I knew a ton of people. I left. We drove down to Arkansas. I called 30 days later. I forgot what it was. They didn't even remember who I was. I had to remind them, I trained you to answer the phone. I trained you to triage. I signed off on your task. You didn't know who I was. So when you have that part-time job or side hustle, even if you stay in the same hometown or stay in the or move across the nation and everything else, you're able to build those relationships. Is every relationship going to be fruitful? Probably not. But at least you'll have the revenue to go over and to extend to get where you really want to be in your transformation. 7, network, network, network. Probably heard this tons of times. Your net worth, your net worth is your network. That's huge. It's huge. Opportunities I've been offered, different things I could do across the nation, things I was able to benefit off on the VA or nonprofits and whatnot, be able to go over and to grow my life emotionally, spiritually, practically, psychologically, spiritually is huge. But be vulnerable. And what do I mean by that? You can't just go over and share in the good times. You got to go over and share in the bad times. Choose that network you're going to go and do. You want to make sure that these people that you're being vulnerable with are faithful, available, teachable, and servants. That's a whole nother lesson and a whole nother podcast. But when they have those and you're vulnerable, they're willing to go over and help you. They might not even be the direct resource. I've gotten onto podcasts because of things I've been vulnerable for. I've gone over and be able to help other people with the testimonies I've had in that particular regard. I've had speaking engagements in that particular regard. I've had opportunities to minister to people because I was being vulnerable. But it's also helps you go over and get where you're at. Because if no one knows who you are and what you do and how they can go over and help, it's very hard. When I used to just sales pitch my business all the time, everything else, people didn't know. They didn't know. But when I was saying, like, when I was being vulnerable, I'm like, I really would need to go over and find some training engagements in this particular regard. And I was at a school and they mentioned this thing and he was talking about, it's like, I hate this type of this. And I was like, what is this beautiful word you're talking about? He was vulnerable about sharing. I was vulnerable where I wanted to be. He gave me that opportunity and I got tens of thousands of dollars of training opportunities in a great relationship out of being vulnerable in that particular regard. So network and be vulnerable. You're not sharing your deepest, darkest secrets and everything else. Those are for people that have all the facts. Another conversation over time. But being vulnerable in the good and in the bad, so you can go over in those people that are that your true and deep network, they can be there for you and they can go over and serve. A lot of times people don't go over and serve because they're confused and they don't know how to go over and serve. People are praying and meditating to serve in capabilities. People have revenue for businesses and jobs, and they're not knowing who it is. And you might be that perfect candidate. So network and be vulnerable. Going to number 8, file for all the benefits you can. Again, this is not about liquidating the system and everything else in what regard. But in certain times, in certain seasons, you're able to extend your fiscal capability so you can continue to go serve your family. I have no shame of using food stamps that I did and WIC and other resources and filing for my VA benefits and school lunches and summer camps and whatnot. Those summer camps empowered my kids and also empowered me to continue to serve you all. Going over and having the opportunity to a church went over and blessed in that regard because I went through 600 resources in those 4 states within those 7 years. It taught me a lot on how to go over and to help and to go over and to empower you. So it helps me, but now I can go help you. So when you're filing for those benefits, when you need them, of course, some of them you need to do right away. The VA, you never know when you're going to need it because the compensation can help you long term. But those other benefits, they're helpful because it empowered me. It empowered me to now go over and I can not have to get the third job. I had up to 6 at one point at the same time to go over and say, okay, now I can focus at the job. If I can feed my family for the season while I'm raising my income, so then I can be a better husband, be a better father, be a better worker. So file for those benefits, especially unemployment. If you're getting out and then you're looking for jobs, don't go over and wait. Your DD Form 214 is the key to go get that. And some states can give up to $600 a week, and you can earn 40% above that unemployment while you're trying to get the best job and everything else. So in some seasons, take those benefits so then you can get the best job. So then the long term, you can serve back the community and the corporations that you're going over and doing. Because when you're in those seasons, you need to go over and execute. Number 9, stop the bootstrap game. We get taught in the military to pull ourselves by the bootstraps, We can all do it on our own. We can't. It doesn't work. When you realistically look at it, not even a travel voucher can go over and get paid by one person doing the work. You might be the gopher that goes to those people to get things to go removed, but if those 5 or 6 people didn't go over and do that process, you wouldn't get your travel voucher, you wouldn't go over and get paid, or your orders. The same thing when you're getting out. Connect with your fellow veterans, connect with your fellow people that are in the community, connect in those groups and everything else. It's not your job to pull all the bootstraps. You have a specific gifting to go over and to rise those boots and to rise those ships and tides. But your job is not to go pull everything. That's what kills us as veterans and first responders when we go over and make the transition. That I need to do it all on my own. I need to be the hero and everything else. Your spouse is still there. Your kids are still there. Going over proper roles to proper people, but it's not your job to pull the entire bootstraps. And marriage is 2 to become 1, not 1 to do the work of 2. So stop pulling the bootstraps. Number 10, bringing the family and friends into the journey. I did way too much and avoided my wife and avoided my kids to go over and tell the struggles we went through. I'm not expecting the kids to go take the full struggle on, but they can go over and pray. They might have friends of friends, depending on the age of your kids. If you have teenage kids, adult kids, they might go over and have that opportunity. Hey, kids, you can go over and pray for dad or pray for mom, going over and going through X. And then, if you're okay, them sharing out some of the vulnerability, because we all struggle. Why do we hide it? We hide it because we think we're going to get looked and shamed upon. There's going to be those naysayers and haters, but those are few. It is real. There is the enemy, the flesh, the devil, and there's naysayers out there too. But the thing of it is, the majority of people are not that way. When you bring in the family and bring in the friends into the journey, obviously, if you have those naysayers, put those proper boundaries. That's a different lesson, different time. But when you bring your family and your friends into the journey, it can be helpful. It was immensely helpful. I was about to get a job in a different city. I was going to commute 2 hours to grab this job. Really great company, at least initially. And my wife's like, I want to be involved in the journey. I don't want to have you move and then we do this whole moonlighting thing and everything else and whatnot. So me and her both got a job. We both worked together. The neighbors were willing to help. They came out and they said, hey, can we go pay you? They're like, no, we'll do this as a blessing. We'll take care of your kids. And it moves my heart even to this day in that particular regard. It moves my heart when the church went over and said, hey, we're going to go over and pay your rent. It moves my heart when went to the Wounded Warrior program and saying like, hey, I've been out of a job for like 3-4 months and I don't know if I'm going to get evicted or not, and be vulnerable. And they decided to pay the rent in the same day, in the same hour. And some of those people became my friends and they've been in the journey. Richard Kaufman is a friend. He's been in that journey in that particular regard. And the brother keeps going over and helping. So bring the family and the friends in the journey. The right ones. Another story, another time. Avoid moving if possible. That is probably one of the biggest things outside of the other ones. I know I put it number 11, but it's one of the top things that catalyst to everything else. Yes, the military did pay for me to go over and get to Arkansas and everything else, at least in the move. I put myself years, if not decades, behind in a sense, fiscally. You can earn millions, and the Lord is sovereign. He can do what he needs to go over and do. But that move, the Lord wasn't telling me to move. The ministry wasn't telling me to move. My wife wasn't doing the move, but my wife honored me anyway. And the Lord's a gentleman, and he didn't go over and kick down the door and avoid it. But that move was the worst 13 to 15 months of my life. God providentially worked it for good. I wouldn't change it. But if you're planning to move and you don't have it and you're like just going over moving like me, avoid it. Your network, your opportunities, your connections, things processing faster and everything else when you're in the system. The move should be the move of God and the move of opportunities, not forcing an opportunity. I forced an opportunity. And sometimes you're going to find out that there's certain benefits, like in Ohio. If you go over in Ohio, there's a lot of state benefits. Also, if you're a guardsman, they basically pay all your college in a nutshell. You go to Delaware, for example, if your kids are at least a C average, that means their associates and bachelor's degrees are getting paid. So when you're moving, you want to make sure you leverage and not just get sick and tired of what's in front of you. That's what I did. I'm like, I'm hurting. I'm in pain. I really want to go over and do this. I'm going to go over and move. I'm not listening to wisdom. I went over and moved. I moved to Washington because of the body, and it was a better move, and that was more of a Lord move. But it wasn't a long-term move. And at least when we came here to Delaware, God providentially works through everything. And so did Arizona. But that move to Arkansas, yeah, absolutely horrible. Probably the worst thing I ever done in that particular regard. So obviously, bathing in prayer, everything we talk about, we want you to use wisdom. If this fits your situation and you need to go reevaluate it, reevaluate. And last and certainly not least, out of all the items, everything that we go and recommend, we treat it like chaff and flare. If it's good, you go over and keep it. If it's bad, chuck it out. But definitely prayer and meditation daily. That helps you realign your soul, your mind, your heart, your thoughts, be able to recollect yourself and everything else. As spiritually, it gets you an outside perspective and everything else. It helps huge. Even if you're a non-Christian, even if you're a non-religious person, meditating and thinking, writing down, reflecting, those types of things, when you do that and take that time, get your walks, get your talks, go to your prayer closet, those types of things, it helps immensely in transformation. Because overall, we all are superheroes. But if we don't access all our powers, we're useless in the battle that we call life. I did not leverage all these superpowers, and they could be immensely more. And I would love for you to add to the chat. And I want to summarize it in this. This is one thing. And here is your superhero challenge. Share this with a military friend, because everyone will leave the service one day. Every first responder is eventually going to leave the service one day, leave the force. So when you go over and are here today, that is the one thing I challenge you today, because I never want you to go over and see this. But if you do, there is transformation to get out of it. And I thank you all for going over and being here. And I thank you for going over all and joining. And we will see you on the next episode of War Hero to Superhero.